In this tutorial, we will give you a brief overview of the fill option, also known as the hatch option. Fill is the process of marking the interior of an object, not just its outline. To show you how to add fill, we will need an object, so I have imported this vector image of our logo. As you can see, the logo is just an outline for now. To fill it, we first need to click on the hatch button here at the top in the horizontal toolbar. This brings up the fill settings. Let's take a look at some of these, starting with Mark Contour. When this box is checked, the laser will mark the outline of the object. If it's not checked, the laser will only mark the fill. So if we uncheck this box and click OK, the logo will disappear. That's because we chose not to mark the contour, and we also didn't add any fill settings, so there's nothing for the laser to mark. On the left here, we now have the fill settings, so let's drag this up a bit so we can see everything, and then enable Mark Contour again. Next to Mark Contour, we have a button that looks like a 1 behind blue lines. When the 1 is behind blue lines, it means that the laser is going to fill the object first, then mark the contour. To do the opposite, just click on the button. The 1 will move outside of the blue lines to show that the laser will mark the contour first and then the fill. Below, the rest of the settings are all grayed out. That's because the enabled box is not checked. So let's check this box, and now all these settings are available. Now let's jump down to line spacing. To create a fill, the laser marks thin lines throughout the object. This line spacing option dictates the distance between those lines. If you use really tiny spacing, and I mean less than 1/10 of a millimeter, the fill will look pretty solid. However, the smaller the spacing between lines, the longer it will take to complete the mark. So let's use a line spacing of 0.05 millimeters. When we hit apply, the logo is essentially completely filled. But if the line spacing were 0.5 millimeters instead of 0.05, we can see these huge gaps between the lines. Next, we have the angle box. This determines the angle at which the laser will mark the lines to create the fill. It is relative to the x-axis, so 0 degrees is a horizontal line, and 90 degrees is a vertical line. Just above the angle box is a checkbox for a crosshatch. This option creates a crosshatch by adding a set of lines that are perpendicular to the existing set of lines. So if you set your angle at 90 degrees, you have vertical lines, and if you enable the crosshatch, it will automatically add a set of horizontal lines. Now let's turn off crosshatch and change the angle back to 0, but leave the line spacing where it is. Now let's look at fill type. The fill type is the path that the laser takes when filling the object. The button shows you the path using red and blue lines. The blue lines represents where the laser will mark, while the red line represents where the laser will not mark. So in this case, the laser will start in the bottom left and mark as it travels to the right. When it's time for the laser to move up to make the next line, the laser will stop marking. Then, as it travels back to the left, the laser will start marking again. And actually, if we disable Mark Contour, you can see that there are no vertical lines in this fill because of the type that's currently active. As you try to find the best type for your fill, here are a few things to keep in mind. Some objects, such as this vector logo, are made up of several groups of lines. For example, the S is one group of lines, the C is another group, and so on. If you see a solid blue line on the type button, the laser will mark a group of lines before moving on to the next group. So in this case, the laser would mark the S and then move on to the C and then the H and so on. If you see a dashed line on the type button, the laser will mark across the entire object before moving on to the next line. So in this example, the laser would mark these horizontal lines that are going across the very bottom of the object. So the bottom of the GTS icon, and then the bottom line in make a lasting mark before moving up to the next line. These red diagonal lines in this option means that the mark always starts on the same side. So the laser in this case marks from the left to the right, then stops marking as the laser moves up a line and travels all the way back to the left, then marks from left to right again. Now let's move on to the average distribute line. This makes sure that the spaces between each of the lines are equal. With this option on, the program would calculate the average space size and use that as the distance between the fill lines so that the spacing is equal. Offset creates a margin or buffer area where the laser won't mark. You can create an offset along all the edges of the object and where the fill begins, and where the fill ends. Lastly, let's go back up a bit and take a look at pattern 1, 2, and 3. When marking, you may want to apply different sets of fill specifications to your mark. Here you can apply up to 3 sets at one time. They are called patterns, and currently we are looking at the settings for pattern 1. As we showed you earlier in the video, to use this pattern, you must make sure that the box next to enable is checked. So let's click on pattern 2, and we see that everything is grayed out because it's not enabled. So let's enable it, and now we have all the same options as we did for pattern 1. For pattern 2, let's just add another set of lines at a 45-degree angle with a line spacing of 0.1 millimeters. When we hit apply, we can see that the settings for pattern 2 are now added to the fill. Now you'll notice that the fill in pattern 2 is black, while the fill in pattern 1 is blue. That's because of the pen number that is being used in each pattern. Each pen number can have different laser marking settings, so make sure that in each pattern that you enable, you're using the pen number with the laser marking settings that you need. That covers our tutorial on fills. If you have any questions about the different fill options, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future laser marking tutorials.